Hello and welcome. In this tutorial, we'll look at how we will be able to allow our Java applications to read user inputs from the keyboard or the console using the scanner. It's important for us to understand how we can accept user inputs from the keyboard because at a point in time, our Java applications will want these inputs to enable them continue their path of execution. So if we are able to read inputs from the keyboard in our simple user login interface that we have, then the users can log in and be able to use the application as they want. Before we look at how we can read the inputs from the user, we need to understand that on our computers, the default output device is the monitor, whilst the keyboard serves as the default input device. And in Java, the system.out is used to refer to the standard output device. That is, if we want to display output information, while the system.in is used to refer to the standard input device. That is, if we want to take information into our applications. To display information to the console in Java, methods such as the system.out.print and println are used. Though accepting input directly from the console is not supported in Java, the scanner or buffet reader classes can be used to create objects that read from the system.in. So in this tutorial, we'll focus on how we can use the scanner to read user inputs from the console or the keyboard. Before we go to the practicals, let's understand some few things about the scanner. The scanner is actually very simple to use in reading user inputs from Java, since it can read the user inputs into the variables of the primitive data type using the methods such as the nextInt, nextFloat, and others. We will have a look at some in the practicals. One disadvantage, however, of the scanner is that it has a very small buffer size of 1 kilobyte, and as such, it makes it not suitable if you want to read long strings from large files. To use a scanner in reading user inputs, a variable of the type scanner has to be created, and this variable will be referencing a standard input device using the syntax scanner read input is equals to new scanner, and we are referencing the standard input device with the system.in. So basically, this syntax is to create a variable of the type scanner to enable us to read the inputs that the user will type from the keyboard. And this variable read input will be an object of the scanner class. We should understand that once we create the scanner object and we are done reading the inputs from the user, we must close them once we are not using them anymore. We will have a look at that in the practicals as well. Let's try out some few practicals on how we can read from the keyboard using the scanner. To begin with the practicals, I'll first of all create a new Java class file and I'll give it the name reading from keyboard. When it loads, I will create my main class using the shortcut and I will zoom in. Let me close the project folder. So the first thing I would want to do is to declare a scanner variable, and as we learned, we need to say scanner and we give it a variable name and we say new scanner system. We can see there seems to be an issue with our codes. That is because we have not imported the scanner utility. So we need to import the scanner utility to enable us use the scanner reading from the keyboard. So to do that, just send your mouse to where the error is and you click on import class. So we can see the scanner utility has been imported. The error is gone. So to ensure that we don't forget to close our scanner variable, I will close it before I write any other code. So I go to the end of the curly brackets and I say user input dot close. Now between the declaration and when I close this scanner variable, I will write my codes to use the scanner in reading from the keyboard. So what we want to do is to ask the user to enter his or her name from the console, and we'll take that name and display a welcome message to the user. So what we would do first is to declare a string variable to store username. And to do that, we simply say string username, and we would not assign any value to it. We simply ask the user to enter his or her name, and we are going to display a message by saying system.out. So I'm using the shortcut and I ask the user, please enter your name. And instead of print line, I will make it print so that the user will enter the name at the same line where this will be displayed. So now we can use the scanner variable to read whatever the user types in the console and assign that to a string variable called username. So we get username. So we will simply get the username by saying username it's equal to user input dot. Now because we are using a string, because username is a string, we will have the option of next line or next. So it will bring us first the methods that we can use to get string from what the user is typing. So we are going to select next line, or we simply type next. Once this is done, whatever the user types on the console will be taken as the name of the user and assigned to the variable username. So once we've been able to get the user input stored in a variable called username, we can now display a message to welcome the user. And we are simply going to say system.out print line hello, and we concatenate the username, and we concatenate again with a string welcome to Java. So let's run it and see what we will get. And it is asking us to enter name, assuming the name we enter is John Paul. When we press enter, it says hello John Paul, welcome to Java. So let me show you a simple distinction between the input.next line and input.next. So assuming we typed instead of next line, we use input.next. What happens if we run it this time? When we run it, it will ask us to enter the name, and again we type John Paul. But this time, we can see it is only saying, hello John, welcome to Java. So the distinction between the next line and the next is that with the next line, it takes everything that is typed in the line, but with the next, it only picks the first string. When it gets to a white space or the space, it truncates the rest of the string. and returns just the first part of the string. So let's change this one back to next line. So how do we read integers from the keyboard? We can use the same scanner variable to read integers from the keyboard. So I would simply declare two integer variables in x and y. I'm not assigning anything to these variables. And again, I will simply ask the user to enter the value for x and y. So I use a shortcut and say, please enter the value for x. And instead of print line, I change this to print. So I will give the user the option to enter the value for x, and to get whatever integer the user is entering, I'll simply say x is equals to user input dot. Now because x is an integer, it will bring us integer methods first before we get any other methods. So integer, we are looking for next int, and this will read whatever the user types as an integer and pass it to the variable x. So I'm going to copy this and paste and simply modify for the value of y. So here I will change this to y. Here I will change this to y. After getting the inputs for x and y, all I need to do now is just to display the multiplication of these two back to the user. So I simply say out the tab key, and I concatenate it again with x multiplied by y. Now let us run it to see what happens. So when we run it, it's asking us for our name, and I would go with John Paul again. Now it says welcome, and it's asking me for the value of x. I enter 25. It's asking me for the value of y. I enter 6. And it says the multiplication of x and y is 150. So as we can see, we are using the same scanner variable to read string, the same scanner variable to read integers, and we are able to manipulate those values to suit our purpose. So how do we ensure that our application will also be able to read floating points from the keyboard? So to do that, I would simply declare two double variables, double number one, number two. I would not give them any values. Then I ask the user to enter the value for number one. So I'll simply say out the tab key, and I say please enter the value for number one. So once this is displayed, the user would have the option to type in. So let me change this to print. We would ask the scanner variable, go and listen to whatever the user is typing. If the user types, assign that to number one. So we say number one is equals to user input dot. Now because we've declared number one as a double, it will also bring us double values and integer values because it can pass the integers byte into double. So we want to pick the next double, and again I would copy this, paste, and I would change this to number two, change this to number two. After this, I would simply display the multiplication, So let me copy this, paste, and instead of x, I will change it to number 1. Change this y to number 1, number 2. And inside the brackets, I would have number 1 multiplied by number 2. So we can run it again. And the first time we are using the scanner variable, we are entering the name as a string. So we say John, or it welcomes us. It's asking us for the value of x, which is an integer. So we say 20, and we enter another integer value, 80, and it returns for us an integer of the multiplication. Now it's asking us to enter the value for number 1, and number 1 is a double. So we say 25.68. It's asking for the value of number 2, which is also a double. We say 50.1. And it returns for us the multiplication of the 2 as a double value. So let us understand that since we are not catching any exceptions, we may have input mismatch entries depending on what the user types. So let me simply see how I can illustrate that. So let us run it and I'll illustrate the exceptions that can occur when we have input mismatch. So because the name is a string, I can say John 1, 2, 3, 4, and it will recognize it as a string. So it says, hello John 1, 2, 3, 4, welcome. So whatever that I type for the name, whatever character I type, it will be taken as a string. But for the case of the integers, x is an integer, so it means it cannot allow a floating point value. If I try to enter a floating point value 2.5, I will get an error, and it's saying there is an input mismatch because x is supposed to be an integer and I entered a double value. So let's run it again, and instead of name, I just type whatever that I want, press enter, it picks it as a name, and this time I'm using the right entries for x and y. So I have integers, no decimals. Now in the case of the double values, if I enter 20 without a decimal point, it will still take it as a double value or a floating point value, and the next one, assuming I enter 1.25, and I run, I would not get any exception. So when we get to exception handling, we would learn how we can ensure that the user types the right value that is needed. So when we get to exception handling, we would learn how we can be able to catch the input mismatch based on the user entries. So as we can see, we are using the same scanner variable to read string, and we are using the same scanner variable to read integers. We are using the same scanner variable to read floating point values. We can always use the scanner variable to read the primitive data types. So that is it for this tutorial.